All right. Welcome, AP World History students, to your Section 1.4 notes. We're going to talk about the development in the Americas, with our essential question being what states developed in the Americas and how did they change over time? We're shifting gears here from the old world where a lot of our early history is going to take place. Now we've shifted across the land bridge to a world undiscovered to Europeans, Africans, and Asians before 1492. Okay. We're going to start off with the Mississippian culture. You got to understand there's a difference between the native cultures in what is today Canada and America and those that existed in Central America and South America, what we're going to call Mesoamerican. In modern day American lands, the cultures tended not to be what we call high cultures. There were some interesting ones, but they really never had the large scale building and infrastructure that we consider high civilization. But they do have a few notables, such as the Mississippian culture, um, first large scale civilization happening between 700 and 1500. In the Mississippi River Valley. A lot of this took place north of Arkansas, up into Illinois and Missouri and places like that. And they created these large earthen mounds. Um, it would be a good idea just to do a quick Google search and look at some of these mounds that still exist. They're pretty neat looking. Well, let's try this. There we go. All right. Mississippian culture. Their government and society, they had a rigid class structure, meaning you're not going to be marrying outside of your class. Something maybe similar to uh, India. They believed in a great sun chief, which would rule over their towns. Their upper class consisted of priests and nobles, which is pretty common, obviously. You'll see that religion has an important role in these American places. The lower class was made up of farmers, hunters, merchants, remember traders, and artisans, people who specialize in creation of goods, such as weavers and potters, people like that. At the bottom were slaves, and remember that slaves tended to be prisoners of war. In some cases, they would be people who might owe money or whatnot, but not the generational slavery that we're probably most comfortable understanding. All right. Also, something a little bit unique with these natives were that they traced their lineage through the mother's side, matrilineal. Their social standing was actually determined by the mother's side of the family. Great son died. The title passed to the sister's son, not his son. So that one's a little bit unique, obviously. You're going to see that women have a larger role. It's better to be a woman in the Americas in native society than it is in most places throughout history. All right, there is a decline in the Mississippian culture, of course. They abandoned their largest city of Cahokia around 1450 and all their other cities by around 1600 CE. Historians are not in agreement as to why they moved. Flooding, extreme weather, possibly diseases from Europeans that have worked their way up through the trading trails. All of these are possibilities. We just don't know exactly. You also had the Chaco and the Mesa Verde. This is your southwestern part of the United States. It's completely different from the mound builders. It's very dry there, obviously, desert type lands. They collected, transported, and stored their water. You can think of Pueblo Indians, might be a little more comfortable for you. Again, a quick Google search to get an image would be good. Not a lot of wood out there. So the large housing structures were made out of stone and clay. Mesa Verde actually had multi-story homes into the sides of cliffs. They're carved right into the sides of the mountains, if you will. They used bricks made of sandstone. Again, pretty cool. Definitely worth looking at. But by the 1200s, both groups are actually going to be into decline. Nobody makes it forever. All right, now your meat and potatoes of 1.4 is your big three: the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Inca. Out of the three, the Mayans are by far the longest lasting. The other two are kind of flashes in the pan, if you will. They burn very brightly for a short amount of time, whereas the Mayan states were around for a lot longer. Like all Mesoamerican cultures, the Mayans were influenced by the mother culture of the Olmec, who came before them. But they're going to take the Olmec and take some of their ideas and take them to the next level. The Mayan government was concentrated around city states between 10 to 50, up to 50,000 people in population. Remember that city states, say Tikal or Chichen Itza, they are a city with the people who live in it, and they rule the surrounding agricultural lands. That's their government. There is no unified empire of the Mayans. Wars were very common amongst these city states. Oftentimes, again, property ownership is different with the Mesoamericans from the European and Chinese models that we're used to studying about. So when these wars would happen, it's not really for land or territory. It's typically for tribute, for stuff, or for human sacrifices. Both the Mayans and the Aztecs put a lot of stock into human sacrifice. They believed their king was descended from God, and that rule passed from father to son, and could sometimes be overthrown if the rulers were particularly bad. And people paid taxes, and they served in the military. A lot of your military leaders, of course, would be some of your richest people, your noblemen. And if you're looking for just an incredible movie that kind of help you understand who the Maya were, there's a movie by Mel Gibson called Apocalypto. It's a tremendous movie if you get a chance to watch it. Okay. All right. Let's look at Mayan religion. And again, you see the dates there. There are classical ages. Even if you went into more detail on the Mayans, they break up their history into, like 3 different groups. But the one that's most important for us is this kind of classical period of 250 to 900. Religion obviously played a large role in Mesoamerican societies, especially the Mayans. Priests were very powerful in their society, and occasionally some of those priests were women. Their moon goddess was female. And these priests would oversee religious ceremonies and festivals. And all of those festivals were based off of this very intricate Mayan calendar. And it really had 2 calendars. They had a solar calendar that was more accurate than what the Europeans were using at the time, almost as accurate as today's calendar. Very, very, very close. And then they had a religious calendar that was shorter. The months would not line up like ours would. They had more months and less days in their religious calendar. And it's almost like astrology. There would be good days to attack and days that you needed to sacrifice and things like that. Understanding the Mayan calendars were circular. You would see them carved in these stone circles. By all means, look up a picture of the Mayan calendars. They're pretty cool. They're artistic as well as being structural in use. It had a ton of gods, but the most important gods are almost always going to be the sun god, rain god, and of course maize, the corn god. The Mayans would take their war captives and use them to be killed off as human sacrifices to the gods. And you're going to see some comparisons. Remember that AP history is based strongly upon comparisons, and the Mayans are going to be sort of known as the Greeks of the New World, whereas the Inca are going to be known as the Romans of the New World. The Mayans are called the Greeks because they dabble so much in sciences, and astronomy and things like that. The priests studied the heavens. They used their calendars to predict the future. They had their astronomers. They had mathematicians. They had a concept of zero that made their math far more accurate when there was no concept of zero. They designed a calendar more accurate than the one used in Europe at the time, as I said. The Mayans, of course, they had that. They had the rubber ball game that they inherited and enhanced from the Olmec. Just a really neat civilization that we, of course, aren't doing much justice to in only spending a few days on it. But if there's somebody that you're interested in, go out there and research. Go down the rabbit hole and see what you can find about them. And by all means, watch Apocalypto. All right, the Aztecs. That's our next group up. As you can see, they're later than the Mayans. The Mayans have already faded away. The Mayans were never conquered like the Aztecs and Inca are going to be conquered by the Spanish. The Mayans, we don't really know exactly what happened to them, but the idea is that their populations began to be too large with not enough food to support it. That they suffered through some droughts and famines and things, and people abandoned the cities and basically went out into smaller groups and assimilated into other Mesoamerican cultures. So the Aztecs show up later, and they are in a different area. They're more in central Mexico. The Mayans would have been south of them in the Yucatan Peninsula, northern Belize, and Guatemala. The capital city of the Aztecs, who are these, they're migrants. They are coming from north. They migrate into the Mexico Valley, following an eagle that lands on a cactus. They've got this whole mythology about it. And they find this great lake, Lake Texcoco. And sitting in the middle of it is an island. And they build their city there. And they name it Tenochtitlan. It is going to grow very rapidly, up to about 200,000 people, which made it one of the largest cities in the entire world at the time. Dominated by their largest pyramid, which was about 150 foot tall. So very nice pyramid made of stone. And again, this is out here on Lake Texcoco, and it comes with some difficulties. They're out in the middle of a lake, so they got to have food. They developed this really cool system of floating gardens called chinapas. Again, Google that bad boy. We'll look at all this stuff in a little bit more detail in class, but do yourself a favor and get ahead of the curve and hit the Google. This helped increase their food production. More food equals more people, equals more power, more money, all the good things. They dug ditches and irrigated fields. They could actually drain parts of the lake to create more land. Now, there were some weaknesses of living on a floating island. They didn't have walls to protect them when the Spanish came. They did have some causeways, these land bridges, but you get on a boat, it's going to be tough to stop you. Look up some really cool pictures of Tenochtitlan. There's some good ones out there. All right, now, understand that the Aztecs were also known as the Mexicas, and that they had a very intricate tribute system. They were bullies, essentially. They forced the peoples that they conquered and in surrounding areas to pay them tribute. They had a lot of political dominance without directly controlling these areas. So, they're not coming in and overruling your local anything. As long as you pay them tribute, they don't come in and smash you. Conquered people were given their protection, and they broke up their empire into provinces. They are, unlike the Maya, who didn't have a true empire, they were city-states. The Aztecs are an empire. They were also a theocracy, which is an important word for you to understand. A theocracy is a government ruled by religion. Probably the most famous theocracy is the Egyptians. You had a pharaoh who's considered a god who is ruling the system, and you had that great pantheon of Egyptian gods. So you have that here with the Aztecs. The great speaker was their political ruler, and he was the divine representative of the gods. You also had nobles at the top, and they are the majority of the military leaders because the Aztecs put a lot of emphasis on their military. Scribes and healers were the next on the social hierarchy. And then craftspeople, or artisans, if you will, and people who traded. Although the Aztecs were not always very trusting of their traders because these traders would go to new places with new ideas. And so there was always sort of a suspicion about merchants who might be spies for other empires or city-states. Peasants and soldiers were towards the bottom, as typical. And then, of course, below them were slaves. And remember, slaves are going to be prisoners of war almost exclusively. Now, they had a complex religion, the Aztecs did, and probably one of the most famous Aztec gods was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. And, they have this prophecy. Quetzalcoatl had to leave. He had to flee east, and that one day he would come from the east, and with him he would bring about their ruin. And so when the Spanish show up, they're showing up from the east, and ruin follows them. Pestilence from smallpox and measles and diseases, of course, and then the fact that they had armor, which the Aztecs did not have metal armor. And, they have arrows bouncing off of them and stuff, and they've never seen a horse. So in the initial, there was some in their society that believed this was Quetzalcoatl returned, but fairly quickly they realized that these were just a strange looking people, and they don't view the Spanish as gods anymore. They had hundreds of gods. They were male and female, and human sacrifice, just like with the Mayans, is going to be a big part of their religion. Human sacrifice was a repayment to the gods for sacrificing themselves on human behalf. So sort of this cycle, if you will. All right. The role of women. In the tribute system, the women wove the cloth that the leaders demanded. And so sometimes Aztecs would take on more than one wife so that they could keep up with the tribute demand of the mean overlords, as many people viewed the Aztecs. The Aztecs aren't going to do themselves any favor when the Spanish arrive, because the surrounding peoples do not like them. They rule. The rule is fairly brutal, and they call for too many tributes. Women could be priestesses, which would, of course, bring them power. They served as midwives, so giving birth to the warriors of the Aztec society. They were also healers. They could even be merchants, which was fairly rare in the old world. And they could be scribes. Both the Maya and the Aztecs had written language, which is important for you to know. Now, let's talk about their decline. Again, you're talking about 150, 160 years or so here with the Aztecs. So they're not around a long time. They have a comparatively low technological level. They don't have wheel. They don't have wheel technology. And so agriculture is very inefficient for them. It's very hard. It's hard for them to keep up the levels of food to support their populations. And the fact that they want more and more human sacrifices meant that they had to expand their empire beyond what it could actually govern. Again, they don't have horses to get them to the farthest regions of the empire to put down rebellions and stuff. And resentment gathered. And again, the Spanish come at the perfect time and actually will ally themselves with many of these native tribes who are happy to help the Spanish pull down the mean Aztecs. All right, now shifting gears and going south a little bit, we're going to go down to the Inca. And the Inca, these areas had these mother cultures. In Central America, you had the Olmec as the mother culture, kind of the ones that came first, and other people learned from them. In South America, a lot of it was the Chavin, were very much a mother culture to those who came after, including the Inca. Now, the Inca were essentially founded by Pachacuti, whose name meant transformer or perhaps shaker of the earth. And conquered tribes living near Cuzco in modern day Peru. And if you've seen The Emperor's New Groove, that's the Inca. They combined all these small tribes into one enormously large state, the Incan Empire. The Incan Empire stretches all along the western coast of South America, practically from the tip to tip. And again, they're often compared to the Romans because they have tremendous roads, 25,000 miles of roads traveling through these mountains. They're amazing engineers. They have perfectly cut stones. They don't have cement like the Romans in the old world do, yet they're able to build these incredible accomplishments without any kind of binding agent. They split their enormous, sprawling empire up into 4 provinces, and each province had its own governor and bureaucracy or government, and those, of course, would answer to the overall Incan emperor. Conquered leaders who were loyal were rewarded. They don't have to pay tribute, so there's incentive for them to stay in line. Something unique to the Inca is something called the Mita system. The Inca had something of a welfare socialistic system. Unlike many other cultures, they took care of their older people when they became too old to be hunters or soldiers or whatever. But the Mita system was basically public service that everybody had to partake in. You had to volunteer so much of your time. If you're a farmer, that's fine. You farm 6 days a week, 1 day a week. You're building something. All right. Everybody partook in the Mita system for the benefit of the whole. So definitely make sure you know Mita and that it's associated with the Inca. The Inca don't have of the big three, they're the only one without a written language. And they used something called a quipu, which was these knotted strings to record economic transactions. We haven't completely decoded them, and it's possible even that the quipu recorded other things, perhaps even stories somehow. Inti was the most famous and most important of the Incan gods. He was the sun god. Rulers were actually considered Inti's representative on Earth, and their main center was the Temple of the Sun in Cuzco, which is the capital. They believed in ancestor veneration, or at least the royals did, and this led to them mummifying their dead rulers who would actually rule as they had in life. And this meant that for the new rulers, they had to expand the empire to get their own lands because the dead rulers before them were still technically ruling. All right, so another unique aspect of the Inca civilization. The priest determined God's will by studying the arrangement of cocoa leaves and watching the movement of spiders and things like that. They diagnosed illnesses and the outcomes of battles. They solved crimes and sacrifices to which gods were necessary at which time. There was some human sacrifice here in the Inca, but not nearly as much as what was going on with the Aztecs and the Mayans. They did have an element of animism, elements of physical, have supernatural powers like rocks and trees and eagles and bears, that they had these abilities. Okay. All right. That, I believe, is. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I got just a little more. All right. Oh, there's their achievements. Like I said, the quipu, the knotted strings. They had tremendous terrace farming. Part of the wonder of the Inca is the fact that much of their empire is 8,000 feet up in the Andes Mountains. Machu Picchu is probably the best known place. It's a religious center of the Inca. Definitely Google it. It is tremendous. Make sure you look at it from as many angles as you can. It's tremendous. I can only imagine what it would look like, at its own height. And again, 25,000 miles of roads. They had a postal system. They had runners because, again, they don't have horses. So they had runners who were trained to run very fast, couple miles, and they would, take their information, their scroll, if you will. Well, it wouldn't be a scroll since they don't have written language, but their news, and they would pass it to the next runner who would take that news and pass it to the next runner. And so information was able to travel fairly quickly across this enormous empire. Unfortunately, it also makes it easy for the Spanish to get to Cuzco and throughout the empire because the roads were so good. The decline of the Inca is interesting, whereas Hernando Cortez came in with 500 Spaniards and horses and conquered the Aztecs under Montezuma. We have the diaries of the Spanish, so we know that story very well. How the Spanish got overtaken by gold fever, essentially. The Aztecs gave them gold, sort of as okay, and now you should leave. But all it did was make the Spaniards more greedy, and they eventually, of course, overthrew the Aztecs. Now, they were lucky. The first time that they tried to take the Aztecs, they were repulsed. The Aztecs had 30,000 very strong, very skilled warriors. But by this time, smallpox had begun to infect Tenochtitlan, and the next time that Cortez comes, the defenses are greatly weakened and they're able to win, which, such a low number of men. They did have cannons, though, and that helped. Now, a few years later, down here with the Inca, it's actually Francisco Pizarro, who is a cousin of Cortez, who comes to make his own name, to seek his own glory. And what they do is, the Aztecs or the Inca have already made a mistake in that one of the rulers dies, and his sons, there's no clear heir, and his sons fight over control of the empire. So a civil war weakens the Inca, and then one of the brothers wins the civil war. But about that time, here come the Spanish, and he is taken hostage by the Spanish, and they demand the largest ransom in human history. 2 rooms of silver and a room of gold are what they're asking for safe return of the Incan emperor. And the Incan emperor will spend almost a year with the Spanish as the Inca are gathering up this enormous ransom. During that time, they convert the Incan emperor to Christianity. When at the end of the year, when the Inca finally show up with the ransom, the Spanish very coldly strangle the Incan emperor and kill him, and consider themselves doing a service to the world because he has now died a Christian. So they too have an interesting story to their downfall. So they are done in 1572. In all these places, the Spanish are going to do whatever they can to erase their gods and goddesses. Of course, they don't want anything competing with Jesus and Christianity. Okay, so what states developed in the Americas and how did they change over time? If we go back to our essential question that we started with, the main ones you need to know, of course, up here in North America, you had the Cahokian. You had a lot of groups up there. No major high states. You shouldn't have to know much of that for your AP exam. But then you had the Mayans, the oldest, the longest. They were city-states, and over time, they could not keep up with their population, and they basically melted away. They had a lot of accomplishments along the way. You had the Aztecs, short-lived, powerful warriors, made people mad, and were done in by Cortez and the Spanish. Down here, you had the Inca in South America, another short-lived one, no writing system like the other two. Civil War, and they too were done in by the Spanish. Okay, thank you guys. I hope you take good notes off of this and you're ready for class.